All right, so we will get started. Just one final note on language and gender, particular to this conversation. Just a reminder that people of all genders can become pregnant, and we want to make sure that our language tonight reflects that. So wanted to make that note before we get started. Please do continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. At this time, I have the privilege of introducing our speakers and our co-moderators. So with us tonight, we have the Reverend Kenyetta Chinwe, who is a Black, queer, gender fluid woman of Caribbean heritage. She is a singer, writer, actor, spiritual facilitator, daughter, sister, aunt, and all-around creative. For the last 3 years, she has been utilizing the skills she gained in faith-based leadership, the arts, and management to advance the work of reproductive justice as SisterSong's faith advocacy coordinator. Her current call is to build a base of visible and vocal faith leaders and people of faith who openly support the cause of reproductive health, reproductive rights, reproductive access, and reproductive justice. We're so glad that you're with us, Reverend Kenyetta. And unfortunately, we are not going to have Reverend Carrie Jackson with us tonight. Unfortunately, we just found out that she was diagnosed with COVID. So let's keep her in our thoughts and prayers. Yes, so very disappointed, sending up lots of prayers and thoughts for her. And I will just go ahead and give her bio because she is someone that I think you all should know. So I am going to introduce her even though she is not with us this evening. So you can go and look her up and familiarize yourself with her work, which is really incredible. So Reverend Dr. Carrie Jackson is the Director of Spiritual Care and Activism for the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, leading RC's mission to equip, galvanize, and collaborate with faith and community leaders advocating for reproductive dignity and freedom. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, Dr. Carrie has served as pastor of congregations in UCC, United Methodist Church, and Presbyterian Church USA, incorporating spirituality and social justice. She has served as adjunct faculty at Union Theological Seminary and One Spirit Interfaith Seminary. Dr. Carrie holds a PhD in Christian social ethics, Master of Divinity, Juris Doctor, and Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Sociology. She is the author of 5 books, including Love Like You've Never Been Hurt and For the Souls of Black Folks. So again, lifting up our thoughts and prayers for Carrie for a speedy recovery and that she is feeling well very soon. And then with us, we also have Dr. Rebecca Todd Peters, also known as Toddy. She's asked us to call her Toddy tonight. So Toddy is professor of religious studies and director of the Poverty and Social Justice program at Elon University. Her most recent book is Trust Women, a progressive Christian argument for reproductive justice. Ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, she has been active denominationally and ecumenically for more than 25 years and currently represents the PCUSA as a member of the Faith and Order Standing Commission of the World Council of Churches. She currently serves on Planned Parenthood's Clergy Advocacy Board and is a founding member of Sacred Congregations for Reproductive Dignity. So Toddy, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And then we have our co-moderators for our conversation tonight. I think we're still waiting on Irene. She sent me a picture from her Zoom class. Dr. Cornell West was speaking, so I can understand her wanting to stick around for that. Oh, now I see her name now. So I will go ahead and introduce Irene Preetha Prasannakumar, who is a theologian currently residing in New York City, pursuing her Master of Sacred Theology at Union Theological Seminary. Irene has her bachelor's and master's degree in theology from United Theological College in Bangalore, India. She has also completed her Montessori training and has enjoyed working with children. She has served the Student Christian Movement of India as a program secretary for the Karnataka region. She has also volunteered to work with IJM, CMC, the Lord Chaplaincy, and clergy assistance. She enjoys pastoral ministry. She also has a quest for justice, peace, love, beauty, and art, so much so that everyone will experience the fullness of life regardless. Irene is also a member of our WSCF US student leadership team. Irene, we're so glad you could make it. Thank you for being
Thank you so much, Erin, and I do apologize for being late. I
No
just
worries.
finished with my class. Thank you.
Completely understand. And then we have as our second co-moderator, Emily Carl, who is a first-year Master of Divinity student at Louisville Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. But she calls Central Connecticut and Western Massachusetts home. They are also a member in discernment with the United Church of Christ, Hampshire Association, as well as the youth director at Center Church UCC in South Hadley, Massachusetts. For fun, they like to watch comedies on Netflix, find the best local spots for good food, and crochet scarves for friends and family. And Emily is also one of the members of our WSCF US student leadership team. So thank you so much for being here, Emily, and helping to facilitate this conversation tonight. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to our co-moderators and panelists to get our conversation started. As we are starting, feel free to type questions into the chat box as well. There'll be a time at the end where we have questions and answers. So we'll be collecting those throughout the conversation. The first part will be moderated by our co-moderators with the questions that we have for our panelists, and then we'll move into an open time of Q&A. So let us know what your questions are and we'll try to get to those. All right, so Irene and Emily, I'll pass it off to you.
All right, thank you, Erin. So our first question for our panelists are, what is reproductive justice and how does reproductive justice connect to our faith as Christians?
You want me to start, Toddy? Awesome. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's amazing to be here with you all. So reproductive justice is an intersectional framework. It was birthed in 1994. The concept as well as the phrasing was birthed in 1994 by 12 Black women who at the time noticed that there was a gap in the at that time current choice movement to address the reproductive the full scope of reproductive needs that affected Black women, Indigenous women, women of color, and poor women. And so they decided that they would create a frame that addressed the full scope of what affects our reproductive lives, understanding that it is not just the right to the reproductive health care that we have, but also the access, and not just the access, but also social concerns and environmental concerns that affect our reproductive lives. And so they created the framework of reproductive justice. It was introduced to the world as a mobilizing tool in 2003 by SisterSong at their first national convention. How it connects to our faith, from my perspective, the frame of reproductive justice is for me, the umbrella of justice. All of the other justice work that we do falls under this framework of reproductive justice. And so if you are someone who believes in justice and mercy, then reproductive justice is something that actually directly affects your faith. We at SisterSong like to say that reproductive justice is justice, because if you're working for environmental justice, if you're working for racial justice, immigrant justice, any of the other social justice issues of our time, you're also working for reproductive justice, because it's not just about an abortion or having access to an abortion. It's about the full scope of things that affect our reproductive lives. Reproductive justice sits on 4 main tenets. And those tenets are that we believe that everyone has the human right to have a child, to not have a child, to parent the children that they have in safe, sustainable communities, free from interpersonal and state-sanctioned violence, and bodily autonomy. And when you think about it from that perspective, those are the things that most of our traditions of love call us to make sure that we take care of the widow and of the children and of the least of these. So to me, it is directly connected to our faith.
Thanks, Kenyetta. I put those in the chat too, the tenets. So, and my response to just build on what Kenyetta has been talking about really relates to some of the questions you're going to ask in a minute, I think. So I'm worried I'm going to step on your toes because all of these things are intersected. And my work in my book, Trust Women, was largely around identifying the problematic way in which the current conversation in the country is framed as a justification framework. And so reproductive justice is what I think we need to replace that frame, because the frame that we have is so broken. It's not just broken, it's actually damaging. It's harmful. It's really quite traumatizing for people who have abortions, stigmatizing. So the frame of RJ, I think, what I have learned from women of color who are using this is that it really offers us a way to decenter abortion while also still saying, of course, abortion is part of what we're talking about. But when we decenter abortion, then it opens up all this space that is currently being consumed by abortion discourse, but it opens up this space to talk about all these other issues that Kenyetta was just talking about, right? So it's absolutely about the right not to have a child, but it's also about the right to have a child. And there are ways in which historically, particularly in this country, women of color have been prevented from having children and been forced to have children, right? So there are all of these ways in which women and people's sexuality has been controlled and constrained and impacted. And so there's this decentering, there's this opening up of this larger set of concerns. And I also really love the tenet that focuses on raising children and our families in safe and healthy environments, because that's, again, pushing back against this dominant narrative that's really just focused on getting babies born, doesn't care about them once they're born, doesn't care about the environments that children are being raised in. It doesn't care about the parents who are struggling to raise children, and how should we be supporting, all of these pieces around health for families and health for parents and children in our community. So I do think that all of those things connect to our faith as Christians. How do we create spaces where people can build families and do that in ways that are supported and safe and healthy?
Emily, before we move on, something that I didn't mention in my answer that I really want to is that the fourth tenet of reproductive justice, which is bodily autonomy, was added in 2010. It wasn't a part of the original frame. And it was added so as to expand the frame to make sure that we include our trans brothers and sisters, our people, our queer community, because reproductive justice affects all of us, not just women. And I think that also lends to an expansive expression of our faith, making room for more people to be involved. And so I just wanted to add that.
That was such a wonderful introduction of what reproductive justice was, in a brief way, that got to the core of, in both the length and width of what it is all about. So having understood that, which I would like to ask the next question, can I be a Christian and a pro-choice?
Want me to start that one?
Yeah, I'll let you take this one first.
Okay. So I think part of my response to this is what's twofold. So on just a simple level, for people who aren't perhaps into a more nuanced conversation, the answer would be yes. But in truth, I reject the binary of pro-life and pro-choice. I think it's I think it's a response. It's part of the justification framework. It's a response to trying to push people into positions that make them oppositional when they're not oppositional. I think that if we're talking about, can I be a Christian and support abortion access and abortion care? Yes. And that's the language that I would use rather than pro-choice, because I think, again, that pro-choice language is really divisive. And I think we really need to, I think people need to, I think we all need to learn new language and new ways of reframing this conversation. Because the language that we have people tend to sort of fall into positions that have been shaped by cultural forces, and when we do that, we actually don't have real dialogue and conversation, because we're just sort of replicating things that are dominant in the culture. And so can I be Christian and support abortion access and abortion care? Absolutely. It's about supporting women and people who are pregnant and helping them be able to have that kind of autonomy that Kenyetta was talking about, that allows people to live into the lives that they are called to live.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Toddy, in that the language of choice can be and has been used as a binary and can be derisive. But I also, within the context of that, want to say the short answer is yes. And the longer answer for me is hell yes. No, no, the longer answer is that choice is a God, in my understanding of scripture and my understanding of my faith, choice is a God-given right. From the very beginning, God has been giving us choices and has trusted us to make informed, faithful decisions about our lives. And so I actually run a blog through one of the collaboratives that I work with through SisterSong. And the name of the blog is God is Pro-Choice, and so am I. And the point of that is that, like I said, God has been giving us choices from the very beginning, since the garden and the tree. And it's up to us to make informed decisions about our lives. And for us to deny other people something that God has given us from our inception seems disingenuous to me. The thing that I say often to people is that the thing that makes devotion is the ability to choose it. God is not a tyrant. And so therefore, you get to make informed decisions about your life within the context of your understanding. And there is nothing, as my tradition says, there's nothing between you, my soul and my Savior. If I am thoughtful and think about the context of my life and make decisions for myself based on my understanding. So yes, you can absolutely be pro-choice and Christian.
Thanks to both of you. I feel like the group just did like a sigh, like, good, I got that. I got reaffirmed right there. We can reconcile. So our next question is a two-part question. And Toddy, you began to answer this first part with how is the pro-choice framework limited in its scope? You had highlighted that it's a binary that we shouldn't have. It's not a black and white choice life. It's much more complicated than that. So if you want to talk more about how the pro-choice framework is more limited, and then we can get to part two of the question.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to talk really about the whole conversation, because it's not just the pro-choice framework, it's the whole framework of how we talk about abortion and reproductive issues in general. And again, like I said, I talk about it in the sense of that the way that's framed in this country is a justification framework. And what I mean by that is women and people are required to provide adequate justification, adequate, if they want to end a pregnancy, there has to be a justifiable reason. If you look at polling data since Roe v. Wade, there's more than 50% of the country that will say abortion should be legal under certain circumstances, right? So what are those certain circumstances? I've labeled those the prim reasons. So it's prenatal health, rape, incest, and a mother's life, right? So for those 4 reasons, there's broad consensus that those are justifiable abortions. Now, what does that even mean, right? I mean, if you're talking, it's the same thing that's happening in the procedure room. It's the exact same procedure. Why are we saying that it's okay under these circumstances and it's not okay under these circumstances? So if we're going to say that, if people are going to say it's okay under these circumstances, what we really need to say is it's okay. Instead of saying that, and again, the prim reasons are 25% of abortions. There's 75% of abortions in the country for women and people who simply don't want to have a baby or another baby right now. The way in which sort of the machinations in the conversation that lead us to make these crazy arguments that it's justifiable under these circumstances, but it's not justifiable under these circumstances, are really, in my opinion, ways to simply based on the need to control women's choices and people's choices, people with wombs choices about what they're going to do with their wombs. And I think that, again, this is why we need to reframe the conversation. That justification conversation is rooted in an ethical question that is abstract. And it's a question of, is abortion right or wrong? Well, that's not the question that people who are pregnant are asking when they're in circumstances where they're considering abortion. If you have an unplanned, unwanted, or a problem pregnancy, the question that you're asking is, what should I do in these circumstances? That's a moral question. That's an ethical question. There are lots of things to consider when you're in that situation. Should I have a child? Do I want to have a child? Do I not want to have a child? How will this impact the family that I already have, right? There are all sorts of questions. If there's a problem with that pregnancy, there are a whole nother set of questions. So, that is a real moral question. That's not an abstract moral question. That's a moral question that people face every day. And we have not provided resources or support, certainly not from communities of faith, to help people answer that question. But culturally, we aren't helping people answer that question either. It's a question that people are having to discern and figure out, for the most part, in isolation, without the kind of support that we offer for people who are making all sorts of other kinds of decisions that are very weighty and serious and have impacts on the sort of the rest of their life, and yet we just sort of throw people out there and expect them to be able to have these serious considerations in isolation and all by themselves. So I think part of the issue is when we destigmatize abortion, and when we destigmatize even just sex outside of marriage and sexual activity and all these sorts of things, then we move to places where people can have better conversations with sexual partners, better conversations about birth control and contraception, better conversations with partners about pregnancy, better conversations about whether or not they want to continue pregnancies or end pregnancies. And that's the kind of deep, rich moral discourse that I think we need to be moving toward in this country.
I agree wholeheartedly. The framework of choice focuses, kind of hyper focuses on the concept of rights. And that is very important, as we see those rights are definitely in jeopardy even now. But it negates all of the other things that go along with having the right to abortion, even when there is no jeopardy or no restriction about rights to an abortion, most people who are poor or in underserved communities don't have access, even when they have the rights. And so choice is only kind of hyper focused on making sure people have the right to have an abortion and a right to the reproductive health care that they need, but it negates all of the other things that affect reproductive lives, like being able to access that abortion if you need it, like being able, you know, and when I say access, I'm talking about not just being able to pay for it, but sometimes to travel to get to it. You know, like there are all kinds of obstacles in the way to accessing the reproductive health care that you need. Also, I feel like the framework of choice hyper focuses on abortion, and for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and poor people, there are a lot of other things that are affecting our reproductive lives besides access to abortion. The maternal mortality rate of the United States, it's the worst in the developed world. And it's even worse for Black women. And so that is a concern that does not get addressed when we just focus on choice. And so the reproductive justice framework allows us to talk about all of these things that are affecting the reproductive lives of, you know, people who can be pregnant in this country. And so I agree with Toddy also that as for faithful people, she calls it destigmatizing. I am Pentecostal. I grew up born and raised Pentecostal, so my language can get real churchy, but what we really need to do is stop demonizing bodies. And that is the crux of it for faithful people. Our bodies are not degraded. Our bodies are not sinful. Our bodies are given to us by God, and we have a right to do everything that we need to do to take care of these bodies.
Both of your passion is just so infectious. Like you can feel it through the screen. And Kenyetta, you began to answer the second part to this question. How does the reproductive justice framework illuminate some of the nuances of navigating reproductive choice that are left out of the mainstream conversations about abortion? So you had mentioned that reproductive justice access is different for BIPOC versus white women. And so if either of you would like to elaborate more on that, we would love to hear.
Well, I can talk about, I'm in the South and I live in Atlanta, which is almost kind of a hub here in the South. As more restrictive laws get passed down, people from neighboring states are all coming to Atlanta to access their abortions or the reproductive health care that they need. But that becomes even harder when we have like the restrictive laws that are coming down in our state. We had one that was just passed through our Senate this week and is going to our House, that it is restricting telehealth for people who are accessing reproductive health care. And so in that regard, coming from this place in the South, where I know that access is an issue, reproductive justice says that if we're going to care for the person, we care for the whole person. And so we have abortion funds here that help people pay for their abortions when they can't. I am currently organizing with some people here in the South who actually help people with transportation so that they can get to their abortions. But more broadly, what we're doing is making sure that we're filling in the deficits that our state is not addressing, like full comprehensive sexual education. Because if you want less abortions, which everybody's claiming, then teach people how their bodies work so that they're not accidentally getting pregnant all the time. And things like that. Reproductive justice doesn't just deal with what happens after you're pregnant, but your whole life and how you manage your whole life so that you can have sovereignty over not just your reproductive decisions, but over your body and your life.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you should also know Kenyetta and I are good friends. We've become good friends over the last several years working on Sacred together. So it's really fun to be doing this with you. Because we are really just building on each other. And, you know, I think this question is, it bears repeating it. We've already said it, but it bears repeating because it's such a new framework. Is that the choice framework really is just focused on abortion. And the RJ framework is just a much, much broader framework that allows us to have much more attention to a wider range of issues. And just to you know, build on what you were just saying, Kenyetta, I mean, the average woman menstruates for 30 years, at least, and spends about 3 years trying to get pregnant, being pregnant, or postpartum. So that's, you know, more than 27 years we're trying not to get pregnant. And that's a long time. And, you know, I mean, most bodies want to be pregnant. And so in the sense of, you know, having to actively try not to get pregnant for sexually active heterosexual adults is an ongoing thing, right? So I'm doing interviews with women right now. I'm doing a new study and we're interviewing women having abortions in North Carolina. And, you know, the number of women who just keep saying, you know, well, I wasn't on, you know, I missed my birth control, or I didn't have time to get the new patch, or, you know, whatever it is, it's just relentless, you know, for decades. And that's just part of our lives, and that's okay. And it's okay that women sometimes need to have abortions, and that is also part of taking care of our bodies and our families and ourselves, and that demonizing and stigmatizing, you know, something that is just a normal part of our life is really you know, the problem with our current frame of conversation around abortion. Yeah, and so again, I think that the RJ framework just offers us so much more space for addressing sex ed and access to contraception and education around different forms of birth control and contraception, and just so many pieces.
Thank you so much. And in continuing our conversation and keeping in mind that we are leaders in our own way to bring about a change in this world, the question that I would like to ask is, what is the role of pastoral care providers in supporting people who are navigating reproductive choice and or loss?
I'll start. You want me to start, Dottie? Okay, awesome. So the phrase that I have been leaning into for the last 2 years in the work that I do with clergy is compassionate care. That is the role I feel that pastoral care should look like as we are helping people navigate their reproductive life decisions. The statistics bear that 1 in 4 women are in this country are having an abortion, which means more than likely you know someone who's having an abortion, and also more than likely you love someone who is having or has had an abortion. And think about the fact that because of the way a lot of our theological frames are made in our congregations, that these people are making hard decisions about their lives in a silo, in total silence, scared of people finding out. And that is not what we are called to as faith communities. The beautiful part of being a part of a faith community is having support in your troubled times. And so I feel like, if nothing else, pastoral care for people who are making reproductive choices should be a place where they feel safe to actually speak their truth and be offered guidance that points them in the direction of making good decisions for their lives, whatever that looks like. And I also think that for pastors who want to actually do this work in terms of counseling for reproductive decisions, is to really, really learn within your capacity the science around what the health is, so that we're not talking from a place of ignorance when we're helping people to make important decisions about their lives. But the first space that we should be in is compassion. That's my belief.
Yeah, thanks. That's really beautiful. And I think it's a really helpful touchstone for how we should orient our thinking here. A couple of things I would add to that. I think it's really important for people who are engaging in pastoral care to, especially not just navigating the choice, but for people who are terminating pregnancies, is to recognize that there is a wide range of emotions that people experience when they have abortions, and that's okay. Everything they feel is absolutely okay, and it's not going to be the same for all of those people. It's tied up in the reasons that they've made that decision. Tears may be about something that you have no idea, and so you shouldn't assume what sadness or happiness or any emotion is related to, and that the ministry of presence is a really important part of how we can support people who are going through abortion. And that's, I think, I'd be curious what you think, Kenyetta. I think that's even more so the case with medication abortion, because it lasts for so much longer than a surgical procedure does. Certainly, women are still bleeding after procedures, but there is something that I have noticed in the interviews I've been doing with the women who are having medication abortions, that it's a very different experience, and people really, I don't think we've gotten our heads around the kind of support that people need when they're going through that. And I think a lot of people are going through that by themselves. And that is a space that we could step into and really increase the kind of pastoral care that we are providing for people. So that's one piece of it. I think the other thing for people who are pastors or engaged in congregational ministry, I think it's really important to recognize that the attitude and atmosphere that you create in your congregation from the pulpit is going to, whether it doesn't even have to be in a sermon. It can be in prayers, it can be in liturgy, it can be in other spaces, but it opens up the space so that people feel safe coming to you as a pastor to say, I'm navigating this. The number of people, again, in my interviews, and I did another set of interviews about 15 years ago with women who had wanted pregnancies and they terminated for fetal anomalies. That group in particular, that's a very specific group. And their reproductive loss is very profound. And so many of those women said, I would never have gone to my pastor, and some of them might have been able to, and the person might have been compassionate, but there's no sense that there's an openness for that. So I think that pastoral leadership is important in those congregational contexts in ways that make it clear that leadership and pastors and the congregation are supportive of people who are navigating these decisions and these experiences.
Before we go on to the next question, I just want to kind of piggyback on a couple of things that you said, Toddy. For sure, I agree with you. Medical abortions are a different dynamic, and most times people are going through that by themselves. And running the gamut of emotions, like you said, but it's by themselves. And if they one person, it might be their best friend, or, but usually they're navigating that by themselves. And so creating an environment that makes it easy to approach is, I think, pivotal for people who are doing the self-managed abortions, because it can be an isolating process to do. Even if you know you're doing the right thing for your life, it can still feel very isolating. Also, to piggyback off what you said, we did a survey, SisterSong and I did a survey in 2021 to try to direct our programming, our faith programming for SisterSong. And the survey was directed towards people who did not identify as men. You could be any other gender but male, and you had to be BIPOC. And the questions we asked were, does your congregation talk about reproductive processes? Do you have sex education? Is there a ministry for single parents in your church? And one of the questions we asked is, do you feel comfortable talking to your clergy about any of your reproductive needs? And I want to also take this moment to say that reproductive choice, though we use that language, is not just about abortions. There are people who are struggling with infertility. There are people who are, all kinds of other reproductive things. And no matter what the reproductive issue they had, the majority of them said that they wouldn't have gone to their clergy. And so that is something that we definitely, as faithful people, and those of us who are wanting to or who are already in congregational ministry, really need to understand and try to change those environments.
Thanks to the both of you for your very detailed answers. And what I'm hearing is the necessity of being present and having compassion, supporting people before, during, and after, as well as knowing the science surrounding bodies and pregnancy and abortion, and just to make yourself a known, safe person. And we're going to be wrapping up with our last question, which is, what is the connection between our Christian theological understanding of the body and bodily autonomy?
Do you want me to start here? So, I think the part of the answer to this question depends on whether or not you want to focus on traditional or historical understanding of theology of the body, or whether you want to look at, feminist understandings of theology of the body, which is where I'm going to start. Because I think that, what I have learned from feminist and other liberation theologians is a much more positive connection to the body, the reinterpretation of the story, the creation story, the narrative in the garden, recognizing that in choosing to eat the fruit, Eve is choosing to have wisdom, is choosing to be whole, is choosing to be a human, and that there are ways in which those stories can be reinterpreted to recognize the beauty and the sacredness and the holiness of our bodies, and that's the Rosemary Radford Ruther's principle for reading text and engaging in feminist theology is, if your principle is the well-being of women, then you simply reject everything as not divine that denigrates or harms women. And when we do that, we can recognize and remember that God loves our bodies, and God gave us our bodies, and our bodies are holy, and our bodies are meant for pleasure and for joy and for helping us be present in the world to experience the beauty of the world. And we do that with and through our bodies. And so all of that is absolutely connected to this understanding of needing to be able to make sure that things aren't done to or with our bodies without our consent. And forcing women to have babies is absolutely a violation of consent.
Toddy, like part of your answer was kind of part of my answer, but I'm kind of have hit this from a twofold way. So womanist and feminist theology, like Toddy was mentioning, encourages us to reject anything that does not allow for our full consent in our faith and with our bodies. And so that for me translated into my country theology, as I call it, that I often say is, if we were not meant to experience humanity and we were not meant to experience this physical reality, then we would just have stayed spirits. We have these bodies for a reason, and it is to experience what being human is like. All of the pleasures, all of the flaws. That's why we have them. And so in that regard, they are sacred and divine, as Toddy was saying. The reason I said it's twofold is because my coming to that place was a long and traumatic experience, because I grew up Pentecostal and queer. And basically, as a female body person who's also queer, I was basically told my very person was a sin. And so therefore I had to deconstruct and decolonize my faith for myself to get to the point where I actually believed that my body as is divine. And I say all that to say, now as a faith leader who is talking to other faith leaders, I always tell my story because I want them to understand that there are teenagers who are sitting in your congregations, who are becoming the humans that they will become, and who will hear rhetoric that comes across pulpits and will internalize that. And it will take them years to undo what is being done across that pulpit. And so for me, bodily autonomy, I often say, gives back to me what God gave to me initially, and that church took from me. And so that's my answer.
That was a brilliant talk on body and theology and the interconnectedness and interdependency, and also emphasizing on the humanity of the body, considering as sacred. It is so rich, and I think we are all taking it in. Thank you so much. Now, we would like to open the floor for your queries. You may either unmute yourself and ask your questions out loud, or you may either post your questions in the chat box.
I can go first if no one wants to. So I'm from Kansas, and we have an amendment up for vote that would make abortion constitutionally illegal in our state constitution. And a lot of people are arguing for this, that it wouldn't actually affect people's access to abortion. So I'm wondering, what's your take on how making abortion unconstitutional in a state constitution would affect people's right to choose?
You want me to go? Or okay. In the current climate that we're in, where we are actually waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court around the constitutionality of the standing decision of Roe v. Wade, it will definitely affect the way people can access abortion in your state, regardless of what people are saying. They're coming from this perspective that Roe v. Wade sits, and so no matter what happens in the state, there is this federal law that preempts it. But that federal law is in and of itself is also in danger. And so right now, we are in a position where a decision can be made this summer that would allow states to make their own rules around abortion. And if that is the case, and your state passes a law that says abortion is unconstitutional for your state, then the people of your state would not be able to access abortion. And so I think that if you are interested as a faithful person in resisting that, I would encourage you to write to your legislators as a faithful person. Say, I'm a person of faith. You know, I'm a Christian, you know, whatever your faith affiliation is. And I understand that people being able to have access to all the reproductive health care that they need is not only good for that individual, but it's good for our state. Because, and then go into, you know, the reasons about how when abortions are illegal, people still try to have them, and then it creates a whole nother health issue. Also go into the disparities of the fact that when abortions are not legal, it disproportionately affects Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people in your state, and adds to the already health disparities that those groups already deal with. But it definitely will affect the way people can access abortion in your state.
I would just add that their Guttmacher Institute has fabulous resources if you're interested in knowing more information about sort of where states stand. And they mark Kansas as leans hostile to abortion rights.
I have a kind of question slash thoughts. First of all, thank you both. This was an absolute privilege. And I especially appreciate the emphasis that you're placing on the rest of the issue. It drives me crazy how much abortion is at the center, and it's all anybody ever wants to talk about. But it's such a huge issue. So thank you for that. And I heard a song recently, you might know it. I think it's called On Children by Sweet Honey on the Rock. And they say, you know, your children are not your children. They come through you, but they're not from you. You know, you can house their bodies, but not their souls. And I've kind of just been thinking about like where our spirits come from. And you guys have both emphasized tonight that our spirits and our bodies are divine and beautiful and wonderful and gifts to be protected. And I kind of think about this concept of choice and how this place of sometimes life becoming subjective. I don't know how much you all are familiar with that argument, but if, you know, in one scenario, we're sad that we're losing a life that was a gift, and in another, we're not going through with it because of, you know, a very unfortunate environment that children are coming into right now. Our country is a mess. We know that. But I guess all that to say, I'm wondering why, as faithful people, all of our resources aren't going into the safe and healthy environment part, you know, adjusting that piece so that we don't have to have abortions. I know that that's part of your work, but why is that not all of your work? I guess is my question.
I'm not entirely sure if I'm following, Izzy, what your question is. And I think I wouldn't say that I have any interest in getting rid of all abortions. I think abortion is just part of healthcare, and I think that people will always need abortions. Birth control, even when you're using it, fails. I mean, there's the statistics that you get at the doctor's office when you go get birth control is for the first year of your use. If you look at how that plays out over 10 years, and then you think about the fact that you're using it for closer to 30 years, it's, you know, so 50% of pregnancies in the US are unplanned, you know, and a number of those are people who are using birth control. Now, some of those, 60% of those become wanted pregnancies, but 40% of them aren't. And so, you know, I mean, I think that we just need to be really frank about the reality that abortion is safe, and it's a procedure that that we shouldn't apologize for, that it's part of our healthcare. So if you want to ask again sort of the question about why resources aren't being added to, I wasn't exactly sure where you were going with that piece.
Sorry, I was trying to collect my thoughts, but lots of them. I guess, let's see how I can narrow it down. I guess I understand legally why we need to have it in place in a safe way, because not everybody in this country or in this planet has the same beliefs that people in a Christian realm do. You know, even within Christianity, it's so broad. But I guess just because this particular event is the intersection of faith with reproductive justice, I am curious about abortion itself. Like, why? Well, I guess I'm having a hard time getting my question out. So I'd like to focus on the subjective piece. How would you both respond to life kind of becoming subjective when choice comes into the picture, specifically on abortion?
What do you mean by subjective?
I was just going to say, what exactly what are you meaning by subjective? That's the part that I don't think I'm understanding clearly.
So I guess I'm talking about like what makes it, what do we deem okay for like a person to exist on this planet? Like, what life do we protect? Like, in the same sense that I think people of faith don't support the death penalty, because like regardless of what you've done, you still deserved all of your human rights.
So is your question about what is the moral status of the prenate?
I think that's what she's asking.
Yeah. Do you want to respond, Kenyetta?
I'll let you go first.
Okay. So, you know, if that's what you're getting at, right? So there's the position on the one side around fetal personhood that argues that life begins at conception, and that life that begins at conception is equivalent morally and legally to a baby that is born, right? So that's sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is life begins when a baby takes a breath, right? So the baby is out of the womb, it takes a breath, that's when life begins, right? So those are the two ends of the spectrum. And people fall, you know, all along the spectrum in different ways in what they believe. And in a country that respects religious freedom, part of the problem with what's happening with our laws is that we're codifying one minority religious belief about when life begins and what the moral status of that life is. So, I mean, that's a bigger question. You know, if you're asking me personally, I believe, and this is what I write about in the book, that life begins with the first breath, right? That's biblical. We talk about, you know, God breathed the breath of life into the earth creature, right? And that's when the earth creature became human. And so I think there's very solid theological foundations for that. And I think that so as a Christian, you know, that's what I believe. But the bigger issue for me as a Christian in a political community is that no theology should be driving the laws, particularly when those narrow theological beliefs violate the theological beliefs of other people in the country.
You summed that up very well, Toddy. I too believe that life begins at birth. Like, that is my personal understanding. But I think what you're wrestling with, Izzy, is a theological interpretation, and the thing about theology is that it is open to interpretation. And so because it is, we cannot create laws based on a theological stance, because a myriad of people interpret it a myriad of ways. And so what we can rely on is the science that tells us, that for most of, the big chunk of gestation is until the last trimester that a fetus can actually be viable outside of a womb. That means that probably we can't really quantify that as life, but you get to believe what you want to believe, because our faith is our faith, but we can't actually craft laws around that, like Toddy says, because then we start to violate other people's religious freedom. But I think you're wrestling with the concept of why is this life that you value as life more important than a person who is already here on the planet. And I think that is just a matter of personal interpretation of scripture.
Thank you for summing down everything that I said. Those were great answers.
So I'll jump in because I have one final question, and then I know we need to wrap up for the evening to be respectful of everyone's time. But Toddy, you mentioned the Guttmacher Institute as a resource, and I'm wondering if you all have any other recommendations for resources where people can learn more, particularly about what's happening at their local level around policy, ways to plug in, ways to use their voice to advocate for reproductive justice, if there are local chapters of SisterSong or RCRC or organizations that we should be following to connect ourselves to the work that's happening on the ground in our own communities. So.
Do you want to start? You want me to start?
Go ahead and start, because I'm typing something into the chat.
Yeah. So, yeah, there are lots of ways you can get involved. I mean, I think one of the ways you can get involved is to become a clinic escort. There are lots and lots of clinics out there that need people on the front lines, because the antis are just so horrible in the way that they attack and harass and attempt to shame people. And so that's one way that you can get involved. Kenyetta and I are part of a group that has launched a sacred congregation designation. Sacred stands for Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity. And so your young adult group could become a sacred community, because I see you all sitting there. But the idea of the sacred designation is that communities of people, congregations of people would study together this curriculum that we wrote, that's an RJ curriculum, and really begin to dig into with people that you're in community with some of these issues and questions on a much deeper level, and then make commitments about what does that mean for you and your people. How are you going to show up in your community? What is it going to matter that you become a sacred community or a sacred congregation? And what difference does that make to people in your town or in your social circle, your community? Because what we need are hundreds of communities across the country who are speaking out and changing the conversation and saying, I'm a person of faith and I don't believe what those people are saying everybody believes who's a person of faith. And here's another way that we can think about it. And here are other ways in which we can think and talk about this. And this is why it's important to do that, right? The religious freedom piece. So sacred, clinic escorting, Guttmacher is a great place for information. RCRC, if Carrie were here, she would tell you all about the new educational platform that they've just launched at RCRC. You can go do classes there and learn a lot about a number of new and different issues. And I think Kenyetta has some more resources for you.
Thank you, Toddy. Everything that Toddy said, and I'm going to drop the link if you want to learn more about sacred here in a second, I'm going to push that and then drop this link. Okay, so the link that the site that I just put in is justfaithforjustworld.org. This is a statement for progressive people of faith, and it is intersectional. It was birthed out of a cross-movement faith organizer event that I sponsored, that I, along with Amplify Georgia and NGP, sponsored at the beginning of 2020. That gathering was a visioning party, basically. We brought people together from 7 areas of advocacy, and we basically dreamed up what a just world looked like from our framework of advocacy, all of us faith organizers. And then I took that and created this statement of faith for progressive people of faith. Our goal for this is to use it as a mobilizing tool. We are currently organizing it into regions so that you can find your people. So if you sign up, shortly, it will be updated with regional designations, so you can find the people in your area who are doing justice work across, not just RJ, but across the board, and that you all can actually come together and create this cross movement, what I'm calling pockets of power, because I feel like we are always more strong together than apart. And so that's one thing. And then now this is the link to Sacred. Like Toddy said, she and I have spent the last 2 years working on this curriculum, and we're really excited about launching it into the world. If you are interested in learning more about the curriculum and possibly having your congregation or your youth group or your women's auxiliary or whatever be a sacred community, just click on that and fill out the interest sheet, and we will get that information out to you. We will be launching the trainer trainings shortly, and really excited about it being used as a tool. One of the great parts about the curriculum is that after we've taken you through the process of learning, it is about making a commitment of what you are going to do and helping you to launch into the advocacy and not just the education.
I just want to say on behalf of our young adults group, thank you so much for both of you. We've learned so much, and we're so grateful to be on this call with you both. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you, CAN crew, for coming through. So good to have you all here. We hope we can connect with you again in future conversations. And I'm just going to drop one more link in the chat. It's another resource that Reverend Carrie Jackson shared with me earlier called Abortion's Welcome. And it's a pro-choice, it's a website, it's a pro-choice spiritual companion for use during, before, and after abortion. So folks that are navigating reproductive choice could be a good resource to point towards there. Thank you so much, Toddy, Reverend Kenyetta. Thank you so much to our co-moderators, Irene and Emily. This has been such a good conversation. I think we all are leaving with a lot more knowledge than we had coming in. I know I am, and I'm feeling really motivated to continue learning and to get connected with some of these resources that you have recommended. So thank you so, so much. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for your questions tonight. And we'll be in touch. We'll send out some more resources that we've highlighted during this conversation tonight. We also would encourage you to stay connected with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is part of our Engaging a Prophetic Christianity series. So there will be more conversations like this one, looking at the intersection of faith and various social justice topics. One of our upcoming conversations is going to be on part 2 on the history of US and Cuba relations with the student Christian movement in Cuba. I think I said that correctly, US and Cuba relations, and in a conversation with the work that they're doing, particularly at the MLK Center in Havana, Cuba. So be on the lookout for more information about that. We had part 1 in February. The next one will be coming within the next few weeks. So there's more information on our website. We are at time, so I won't give all the announcements, but I'll drop a couple links in the chat for how you can stay connected. Make sure you get our emails and follow us on social media and all that good stuff. So again, thank you all so much for your time this evening. It was so good to spend this time with you. Have a good night, everybody.